Have you ever found yourself hoarding hotel shampoo bottles even though you haven't stayed in a budget motel in 15 years? Or maybe you catch yourself feeling genuinely anxious when someone suggests splitting the check at a restaurant, not because you can't afford it, but because some deep part of your brain is still calculating the cost of everything in terms of how many hours you'd have to work to pay for it. If any of this sounds familiar, congratulations, you're experiencing the side effects of growing up broke, and trust me, you're not alone. My name is Nick, and I've spent way too much time thinking about how childhood poverty rewires your brain in ways that stick around long after your bank account balance improves. If you're someone who grew up counting pennies and now finds yourself making decent money but still feeling like you're one emergency away from disaster, make sure to hit that subscribe button because we're about to dive deep into something most people never talk about. Here's what most people don't understand about growing up broke. It's not just about having less money as a kid, it's about how your developing brain adapts to an environment of scarcity, and those adaptations don't just magically disappear when you start earning a steady paycheck. Your brain literally changes structure and function to help you survive in a world where resources are limited and unpredictable. And I'm not using rewire as a metaphor here. We are talking about actual biological changes. When you grow up with chronic financial stress, your body is constantly flooded with cortisol. This reshapes two key parts of your brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus. Think of the amygdala as your brain's alarm system. In people who grew up broke, this alarm system becomes hyperactive. It treats a minor, unexpected bill with the same panic response as a physical threat to your safety. At the same time, the hippocampus, which helps with memory and context, can actually shrink, making it harder to plan for the long term because your brain is stuck in immediate survival mode. The problem is these same survival mechanisms that helped you navigate childhood poverty can actually sabotage your ability to build wealth as an adult. The scientific term for this is scarcity mindset, but I prefer to think of it as poverty brain. It's like having a security system in your head that's permanently stuck on high alert, constantly scanning for threats to your financial survival, even when you're objectively safe. This hypervigilance served you well as a kid because it helped you notice when money was tight and resources needed to be conserved. But as an adult trying to build wealth, this same mindset can become your biggest obstacle. Let me give you some examples of how this shows up in real life, because I guarantee you'll recognize yourself in at least a few of these. People who grew up broke often struggle with what I call the feast or famine spending pattern. Like when money comes in, there's this unconscious urge to spend it immediately because deep down you don't really believe it's going to stick around. Your brain is thinking, better buy what I need now while I have the chance, because who knows when the next opportunity will come. This is the opposite of the delayed gratification that wealthy people practice naturally. Then there's the hoarding tendency I mentioned earlier. You keep things long past their usefulness because throwing anything away feels wasteful. Your closet is full of clothes you never wear but can't donate because they're still technically wearable. Your kitchen cabinets are stuffed with expired coupons and condiment packets from fast food restaurants. It's not about being messy or disorganized. It's about a deep-seated fear that you might need these things someday and won't be able to afford to replace them. The relationship with debt is another big one. Some people who grew up broke become completely debt-averse, refusing to take on any form of credit even when it would benefit them financially. They'll pay cash for a car instead of financing it at 0% interest and investing the cash difference. Others go the complete opposite direction and develop an unhealthy relationship with credit, using it to maintain a lifestyle they can't actually afford because the alternative feels like sliding back into childhood poverty. Here's one that might hit close to home. Do you ever feel guilty about spending money on yourself even when you can clearly afford it? Like you need to justify every purchase that isn't absolutely essential? This guilt isn't rational based on your current financial situation, But it makes perfect sense when you understand that your brain learned to associate spending money with potential danger. Every dollar spent meant one less dollar available for true emergencies, so your brain developed this internal voice that questions every expenditure. The career choices people make are heavily influenced by poverty brain too. You might find yourself staying in a job that pays well, but makes you miserable because the security feels more important than fulfillment. Or you might avoid taking entrepreneurial risks that could significantly increase your income because the possibility of failure feels catastrophic rather than just disappointing. When your brain was shaped by genuine financial instability, the idea of voluntarily giving up a steady paycheck can trigger panic responses even when you have savings to fall back on. Social situations become minefields when you're operating from scarcity mindset. You might avoid social gatherings that involve spending money, not because you can't afford them, but because your brain interprets any non-essential spending as reckless. You could be the person who always suggests the cheapest restaurant or declines invitations to events that cost money, even when your friends know you can afford it. This isn't about being frugal in a healthy way. This is about being controlled by fear-based decision-making that was programmed during your childhood. The relationship patterns are fascinating too. People with poverty brain often struggle with romantic relationships where money is involved. You might feel uncomfortable when a partner wants to spend money on experiences or gifts, or you might go the other direction and overspend to prove you're not broke anymore. Some people become controlling about household finances because the idea of someone else making spending decisions feels dangerous. Others become completely passive about money management because they learned as children that financial decisions were something adults stressed about and often got wrong. But here's what makes this whole thing even more complicated. Growing up broke also creates some positive adaptations that can actually help with building wealth if you learn to channel them correctly. You probably have an incredible ability to stretch a dollar when you need to. You can spot a good deal from a mile away. You understand the value of hard work in a way that people who grew up comfortable might not. You're probably more grateful for what you have and less likely to take financial stability for granted. The problem is that without understanding how your brain was shaped by childhood poverty, you can't distinguish between the helpful survival skills and the limiting beliefs that are holding you back. You end up letting poverty brain make financial decisions that keep you stuck in patterns that no longer serve you. The good news is that once you recognize these patterns for what they are, you can start to retrain your brain to operate from abundance instead of scarcity. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending money doesn't matter. This is about understanding that your brain developed certain responses to help you survive a specific environment, and now you need to update those responses to help you thrive in your current reality. The first step is recognizing that these aren't character flaws or personal weaknesses. These are logical adaptations to the circumstances you grew up in, and they made perfect sense at the time. The anxiety around unexpected expenses is probably one of the most persistent side effects you'll deal with. Even when you have a solid emergency fund, your brain still treats every car repair or medical bill like a potential catastrophe. I know people who make six figures and still lose sleep when their washing machine breaks down. Not because they can't afford to replace it, but because their nervous system learned decades ago that unexpected expenses were existential threats. Your rational mind knows you can handle a $1,500 appliance replacement, but your lizard brain is screaming that this could be the beginning of a financial death spiral. This shows up in career decisions in ways that might surprise you. You probably gravitate toward jobs with steady paychecks over potentially higher earning but less predictable opportunities. The idea of commission-based work or freelancing might make your stomach turn, even if the income potential is significantly higher than your current salary. Your brain isn't being irrational here. It's protecting you based on what it learned about financial instability during your formative years. But This same protective mechanism might be preventing you from taking calculated risks that could dramatically improve your financial situation. Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something I didn't fully understand until I started researching the neuroscience behind all this. Growing up in financial stress literally changes how your brain processes reward and punishment. When you're a kid dealing with poverty, your brain becomes hyper-tuned to immediate threats and immediate rewards. Long-term planning becomes less important than short-term survival. This is why people who grew up broke often struggle with investment strategies that require patience and delayed gratification. Think about retirement planning. Your logical brain understands that contributing to your retirement account is smart, but your emotional brain sees that money leaving your paycheck and interprets it as a reduction in your immediate security. The concept of giving up money today for a benefit you won't see for decades feels almost physically uncomfortable. It's not that you don't understand compound interest or the importance of saving for retirement. It's that your brain is wired to prioritize immediate security over future wealth building. The relationship with food is another area where poverty brain shows up in unexpected ways. If you grew up in a household where food insecurity was real, you might find yourself overeating at buffets or social gatherings even when you're not particularly hungry. Your brain learned to take advantage of abundance when it was available because scarcity was always around the corner. Some people develop the opposite response and become extremely rigid about food spending, feeling guilty about buying anything beyond basic necessities even when they can easily afford to eat well. Shopping behaviors get weird too. You might find yourself buying the cheapest version of everything, even when spending a little more would provide significantly better value over time. Your brain sees the higher upfront cost and triggers the scarcity response, even though the math clearly favors spending more initially. Or you might go the complete opposite direction and engage in what psychologists call compensatory consumption, buying expensive things to prove to yourself and others that you're not broke anymore. Neither approach is particularly helpful for building long-term wealth. The social dynamics around money become complicated when you're operating from poverty brain. You might feel uncomfortable in environments where people spend money casually, like expensive restaurants or luxury stores, not because you can't afford to be there, but because your brain interprets casual spending as reckless behavior. You could be the person who calculates the tip 3 times because overpaying feels wasteful, or you might overtip dramatically because undertipping feels like admitting you can't afford to be generous. Friendships can suffer when your money mindset doesn't match your actual financial situation. You might decline social invitations that involve spending money, not because you can't afford them, but because your brain categorizes all non-essential spending as potentially dangerous. Your friends might interpret this as you being cheap or antisocial, when really you're just being controlled by neural pathways that were carved out during your childhood. The irony is that this can actually cost you money in the long run, because networking and social connections often lead to better career opportunities and higher incomes. Gift giving becomes an emotional minefield. You might stress for weeks about how much to spend on wedding gifts or birthday presents because your brain doesn't have a good framework for appropriate spending in social situations. You could end up spending way too much because you're overcompensating for childhood feelings of inadequacy, or way too little because any spending beyond survival necessities triggers anxiety. Either way, you're not making decisions based on your current financial reality. The way you think about your children's financial future gets complicated too. Some people who grew up broke become overly generous with their kids, trying to give them everything they didn't have. Others become overly restrictive, passing on the same scarcity mindset that shaped their own relationship with money. Neither approach teaches children healthy financial habits, and both are driven more by your past experiences than by what's actually best for your kid's development. Here's something that might make you laugh or cry, depending on your perspective. People with poverty brain often become experts at finding deals and stretching dollars, but terrible at recognizing when their time would be better spent earning more money instead of saving small amounts. You might spend an hour clipping coupons to save $5, when That same hour could be spent on activities that increase your earning potential by hundreds or thousands of dollars. Your brain learned to optimize for saving money, not for making money. And those are very different skill sets. The insurance and warranty decisions are particularly telling. You might buy extended warranties on everything because the idea of having to pay for repairs feels scary, even when the math clearly shows that self-insuring makes more sense. Or you might under-insure everything because paying for insurance feels like throwing money away, even though the potential financial consequences of being uninsured are catastrophic. Your brain is making these decisions based on childhood experiences with financial vulnerability rather than adult risk management principles. Investment decisions become paralyzed by analysis paralysis. You might spend months researching the perfect investment strategy while your money sits in a savings account, earning basically nothing. Your brain interprets investment losses as threats to your survival. So it demands absolute certainty before taking any action. But absolute certainty doesn't exist in investing, which means you end up taking no action at all. Meanwhile, inflation is quietly eroding your purchasing power while you're trying to find the perfect risk-free investment. The good news is that understanding these patterns is the first step toward changing them. Once you recognize that your financial anxiety isn't based on your current situation, but on outdated programming from your childhood, you can start to make more rational decisions about money. This doesn't happen overnight, and it's not about ignoring your instincts completely. It's about learning to distinguish between legitimate financial concerns and trauma responses that are no longer serving you. Great. The credit score obsession is another fascinating manifestation of poverty brain that most people don't recognize. You might check your credit score multiple times per week, not because you're planning to apply for credit, but because that 3-digit number represents security in a way that your actual bank account balance doesn't. Your brain learned that creditworthiness equals survival, so you obsess over every point fluctuation like it's a matter of life or death. Meanwhile, people who grew up financially secure might not even know their credit score because they've never had to worry about being denied for basic necessities. The emergency fund becomes both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, having money set aside for emergencies is smart financial planning. On the other hand, poverty brain often demands emergency funds that are way larger than necessary because no amount ever feels like enough. You might have 12 months of expenses saved while financial experts recommend 3 to 6 months, but your brain still doesn't feel safe. You're essentially paying an opportunity cost for emotional security, keeping money in low-yield savings accounts when it could be invested for growth. Here's where things get really twisted. The more successful you become financially, the more disconnected you might feel from your own success. Imposter syndrome hits people with poverty brain particularly hard because deep down, you don't believe you deserve financial stability. You might downplay your achievements or attribute your success to luck rather than skill and hard work. This isn't humility. It's your brain protecting you from the vulnerability that comes with acknowledging you've moved beyond your original circumstances. The way you handle windfalls reveals everything about your money programming. Get a tax refund, bonus, or unexpected gift of money, and poverty brain kicks into overdrive. Some people immediately spend it on things they've been denying themselves, as if the money might disappear if they don't use it quickly. Others become paralyzed by the responsibility of making the right decision with this unexpected resource. Either way, the response is driven by scarcity programming rather than strategic financial planning. Business ownership becomes complicated when you're operating from poverty brain. The entrepreneurial mindset requires a comfort with uncertainty and calculated risk-taking that directly conflicts with survival programming. You might have brilliant business ideas but never pursue them because the possibility of failure feels existential rather than educational. Or you might start a business but run it so conservatively that you limit its growth potential, essentially creating another job for yourself rather than building something that could generate real wealth. the relationship with financial advisors and investment professionals gets weird too. You might be suspicious of anyone trying to help you with money because your brain learned that financial predators target people who grew up broke. Alternatively, you might defer completely to professional advice without understanding it yourself because you don't trust your own judgment about money. Neither approach serves you well because building wealth requires being an informed participant in your own financial decisions. Negotiating becomes almost impossible when scarcity mindset is running the show. Whether it's asking for a raise, negotiating a salary for a new job, or haggling over the price of a car, your brain interprets these situations as potential threats to your financial security. You might accept the first offer because asking for more feels greedy or risky. Your childhood taught you to be grateful for whatever you could get, not to advocate for what you're actually worth. The generosity patterns are particularly interesting. Some people who grew up broke become extremely generous with money as adults, almost compulsively so, because they remember what it felt like to need help and not receive it. Others become very protective of their resources, not because they're selfish, but because their brain still operates from the assumption that giving money away means having less for survival. Both responses make sense given the programming, but neither necessarily reflects your current values or financial capacity. Look, if you recognize yourself in any of these patterns, don't panic. Your brain isn't broken, it's just running outdated software that needs an update. Breaking out of these patterns requires confronting deep fears. It requires believing that you have the right to take chances, that you have the right to fail and be okay. You have to remind yourself that failure isn't catastrophic anymore. You actually do have a safety net now, even if your nervous system doesn't believe it yet. The fact that you made it this far through the video means you're already ahead of most people who never question why they think about money the way they do. Start small, challenge one scarcity response at a time, and remember that building wealth isn't just about accumulating money, it's about rewiring the neural pathways that have been holding you back since childhood.